Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, friends. Welcome back to another action-packed historical tour with Pretty Gritty Tours and the city of Tacoma. I'm your guide this evening, Chris Stodinger, and it is my genuine pleasure to have you guys on board for this tour tonight. I don't know that we've ever had a project more ambitious in its scope, so I'm excited to see how it goes tonight. Just shouldering the monumental task of trying to time travel through Tacoma over 100+ years is a lot. So I'm excited to see what comes out of it tonight. As always, if you have questions or comments, or you want to just join in on the frivolity tonight, please leave your comments in the section down below, whether you're joining us on Facebook or YouTube. The more the merrier. We love having everyone on board. And I would like to officially thank and give a nod to our benefactor and sponsor for this evening, the city of Tacoma, in particular, the city of Tacoma's Historic Preservation Office. This is their project that they have launched, and throughout the year, they endeavor to ensure that there are a series of free tours that people can use to engage with their city. And traditionally, this would have been done as a walking tour, and it wouldn't, I think, have been quite the same. So in some ways, 2020 has really blessed us with some new innovations and opportunities, and this is one of them. So let's see. It looks like we got some regulars on tonight. I'm excited to see you guys. And don't worry, no jump scares tonight. Tonight is just pure quantum leap, wholesome time travel through the city of Tacoma. So you're in luck. It's not just the city of Tacoma that I want to thank before we really get going on this too. This project, because of its breadth and scope, could only have been made possible through the generous and dedicated work of so many others in the city of Tacoma. In particular, Over Tacoma. If you're not familiar with Over Tacoma, this guy's a phenomenal drone pilot, and he goes around. I got the site here, and you should become familiar with Over Tacoma. They've done simply the superlative, the absolute best of drone photography and aerial views of Tacoma throughout the history of time. Everything that they do is solid gold and a winner, so check them out. Grit City Magazine, of course, has done a tremendous amount of research and always stokes my fires on everything. Michael Sullivan, as I think the pinnacle of historians in the area, has always been a huge inspiration and resource for me doing my thinking on Tacoma. And then Andrew Cox actually was a student of Michael Sullivan's who took on the Recapture Tacoma project, which was the original like then and now project, I think, in Tacoma. And I'll share links to all of that later, but you'll see some of his stuff tonight because I think he's got the most unique take on like actual blending of photographs. And then Over Tacoma and Grit City Magazine have done a tremendous job of just lining up historic shots. So you're going to get to see all of those tonight. So let's jump on into it. So Tacoma then and now, man, it's it's important when we're talking about this at all to acknowledge the fact that we are on the ancestral land of the Puyallup people. And one of the great tragedies for me is that I haven't uncovered a treasure trove of historic photographs of, pre-white settlement to the area. And so when you're looking at, Puyallup photos, because it's so fundamental for me to acknowledge their place in this area, we're looking like 1860s. This one right here is from 1886 and shows the traditional Salish canoes on the coast of what is now Old Town. So they've been here the longest, generations and generations, and we are really only looking at a small blip of the timeline here. And I'm limited in my capacity to time travel with you all just by the photography aspect. So as soon as cameras really started to arrive to the area is kind of when we get to bounce around in time. But it's going to be pretty cool. I'll give you that much. And of course, Tacoma, the mountain itself, Rainier, has been here the longest of all of us. And this mountain, I'm sure most of you who are joining us tonight are already familiar, would have been traditionally known as Tacoma, which either means mother of the waters, or I think smaller than Mount Adams. There's a few different interpretations of it, but the Salish word would have been Tacoma. And there have been multiple attempts to rebrand the mountain back to Tacoma. And I think it was in 1899, I think was the first big push, where a lot of just environmentalists in the area and a lot of people from Tacoma really made the push to rename the mountain, and unfortunately got smacked down. And then I think they tried again in either 1917 or the early 1920s, but none of these attempts have stuck. But this is one of the first shots of Tacoma, the city as we know it today. And this is from 1884. And this is that main building that you see there, still under construction in 1884, is the Tacoma Hotel. And this is A Street today. And you can see it's got the livery in front there. And then what I love about this photo that I think is so remarkable is the tide flats. You get to see this area that is so often forgotten when we think about Tacoma today as that marshy tide flat area that first attracted people to the area, thinking that, oh, it'd be easy to get a train right down to the waterfront. And hey, presto, they were right. Also, you can see just the tremendous amount of deforestation that took place right away. As soon as people started settling and colonizing the area, those trees were gone. And to give you a perspective on that, this is early on when the Northern Pacific Railroad was sending survey crews out, and a lot of the lumber mills in the area were starting to populate. And you can see the remnants of the trees there as they are disappearing and being replaced with canvas tents. And then the city blossoms. So if you can see on the right hand of the photograph there with the 3 chimneys, that is the first headquarters for the Northern Pacific Railroad. That was the building that they established. And I can't stress enough how important it is to always think of Tacoma as a railroad town. It was built and watered and cultivated with railroad money, and its fortune has risen and fallen with the success of the railroad over and over again. And even to this day, when you look at it, I think you can make a very strong argument that Tacoma remains a railroad town. It's the port's ability to bring in large freight trains and import, export, whatever you could possibly imagine, that maintains it as an economic powerhouse even today in 2020. So bravo us. Moving forward to today, so that's looking at those tide flats again. And like I said, you forget, right? Like the Tacoma Dome is essentially on the tide flats there. And that whole area has been populated with the switching yard, the port of Tacoma, all this infrastructure that you don't really go down and engage in because it's a functional port. But when you switch back and forth between them, to see the openness of the tide flats now completely occupied with Tacoma is jarring. Looking into the early 1920s, you can see that Rainier has always been a fixture of the area, but the Northern Pacific Railroad quickly got rid of their small establishment there and built the grander headquarters, which is still down in Tacoma today. So that building on the left with the rotunda is the most modern Northern Pacific Railroad headquarters. It's now the One Pacific building. And here's an example of that Andrew Cox photography that I was talking about, where he has gone down and essentially overlaid historic images on contemporary photographs. So this would have been the Northern Pacific building in its heyday. And you can see the black and white portion there is actually missing today. It went through a series of renovations and revitalizations and so on and so forth, and has been demolished, leaving just the vacancy of Fireman's Park, which is down there. When you're looking from the north facing south, you can see what is now Stadium Way, and it pours right into Whiskey Row, or Pacific Avenue as we call it now. And on the right there, you can see the majesty of Old City Hall, which at the time was New City Hall, and its commanding clock tower. But that didn't go in until 1893. The Northern Pacific building was built and completed in 1888, 1 year before Washington got its statehood. And then switching forward to today. So this is one of the fantastic shots from over Tacoma, where he goes out and he puts the drone in exactly the right position. And it is, beautiful. Flying around, one of the things I think is particularly interesting about Old City Hall is that even though it was built in 1893, the tower is a separate structure. It was added 5 years later in 1898, and the bells in it are all gifts. They're memorial gifts from the American ambassador to France, who lived 1/3 of his time here in Tacoma, the rest in Washington, D.C., and the rest in Paris. And his daughter, unfortunately, passed at a very young age. And so he had these 4 bells cast by the same company that did the Liberty Bell, and they remain in the tower today. And then in several years after that, they completed the clock, which is on the tower as it is today. And the clock hasn't been maintained or running since the 1970s, when Surge purchased the building, I believe just last year. Who knows? Feels like this has been a million years in 2020. The plan was to revitalize this building and then to have that clock tower up and running by New Year's of 2021. And we'll see, right? Obviously, times are different. And so I haven't heard any current projections on when things are going to get done. But, you know, COVID time. And, of course, this is Old City Hall today. Like I said, all 4 bells still remain in the tower up there. And this entire structure is completely abandoned and vacant. So I'm looking forward to seeing it full of new life again. Down here, this is the Murray Morgan Bridge, or the 11th Street Bridge, or as it, I guess, was originally known, the City Waterway Bridge, which is perhaps the most descriptive and least exciting of all the names that it's ever borne. It is, of course, a vertical lift bridge and was originally opened in 1913. And when you're looking across at it, you can see how empty the port of Tacoma used to be in the early 1900s. And it's because everyone was bringing in either early steamships or wind-powered tall ships, and they were bringing them right into what is now the Foss Waterway. And if you're familiar with any of our other tours, you know that the Balfour Dock building, which is now the Foss Waterway Seaport, was the main hub of transportation down there. So before really spreading the tendrils of infrastructure out onto the tide flats, this was a very vacant area. And in fact, during the Depression, it was a massive Hooverville. There were shanties and shacks aplenty where people were living. But time warping to now, you can see just the tremendous amount that has been developed down there. And yes, thank you, Lauren, for bringing it up. There's so many links that I need to share with you guys because so much goodness is developing in the area, and it's hopefully gonna give you a lot to look forward to throughout the darkness of winter. And then, oh, thank you. This is an excellent point that we're going to get to later about the film industry here in Tacoma. But like I said, I've got a lot to cover tonight, so we're going to do our best. So the Washington building, which is our tall one here, sort of in the center, kind of lined up with Mount Rainier, was the tallest building in Tacoma at 237 feet when it was constructed. And then it lost its title in 1970 to that beauty right there. I call it the Wells Fargo building. It's the 1201 Pacific building. Now that Wells Fargo Plaza is no longer occupying it, and that is 338 feet. But I just like this one because you get to see the tremendous change in the Tacoma skyline. And look at that, like, change in haze too. All of that industry down there just pumping out Lord knows what. And yes, the Washington building has just been finished rehabbing this year. And if I'm not mistaken, someone can correct me on this. I believe it's one of the buildings in town that also has a peregrine falcon nesting area on top of it. But I always forget which buildings occupy them. So this is of basically the area where the Tacoma Dome and Freight House Square are today, with the Milwaukee Railroad coming through. And this whole area, you know, they had to build all that railroad infrastructure over the tide flats, drive these pilings down into the marshy ground, and then create a series of trestles, bridges, and rail lines over the area. But it was an even grade, so it was easier done than a lot of other places, certainly going over the Cascades. And then today you'd be looking at this. So Freight House Square is not just a cute name. The Freight House actually was an operational freight house. In fact, the largest freight house west of the Mississippi for a very long time, until I believe one in California took over later. And today there's a series of really fantastic shops inside. And honestly, some of the best food in Tacoma is in the hodgepodge food court of Freight House Square. And so if you have an opportunity, once the pandemic is over, please go down and check it out, because it's certainly worth exploring in there. Also, my favorite knife shop in the city of Tacoma is in the basement of Freight House Square. When we move downtown, I just love the fact that you get this shot of seeing just how massive the trains were that actually came into Tacoma. And when I'm telling you to think of this place as a railroad town, you have to always bear it in mind. You know, what is now the University of Washington Tacoma campus were dry goods and breweries and meatpacking facilities, all designed to accommodate the railroad. And they could take a train like this bad boy right here, straight down what is Prairie Line Trail, or the Prairie Line Trail Interpretive Walk today, right into the heart of Tacoma, straight up from the waterfront. Looking at that same spot today now looks like this. And so it is this beautiful repurposed walking trail that cuts right through the very swanky heart of the University of Washington Tacoma campus. But the enormous amount of brick buildings down there are historic to that era. The University of Washington Digital Library actually has the Tacoma Then and Again project, which mostly pairs up pictures from the 1970s, when Tacoma was really sort of in a major slump, and a lot of dilapidation and derelict buildings were prevalent, with pictures from 2008, when Tacoma was hitting its resurgence again. And a lot of them focus on the University of Washington campus area, and like the Harmon Furniture Building being down there as well. Let's take you guys over here really quick. So obviously, Union Station, completed in 1911, was designed to be the major, nucleus of train travel throughout the region, especially because Tacoma was always and forever the major anchor from east to west coast. Times have changed and things have moved on, but the train was the major lifeblood to the area. And so the same firm that designed Grand Central Terminal in New York also did the Union Station here in Tacoma. And when this building fell into dereliction, was eventually abandoned, it was purchased by the federal government and turned into the courthouse that we have today, and refurbished very nicely, from the skylight to the copper on the roof there, and then filled with a tremendous amount of Chihuly glass inside there. Why I chose this photo is because you can see on the back here where the court now occupies a series of offices and areas. This used to be the area that would go down to the platform. And I think it's difficult for people to conceptualize now, but if you cross the Chihuly Glass Bridge and go over 705 and the train tracks, you can see that that main thoroughfare, that artery into Tacoma, still runs through the area. And so the train still continues all the way up the Tacoma Peninsula and down towards Olympia. And the train would have just come off a little spur there and then into the various stalls of the platforms down there. And I'm pretty sure I got a good picture of that coming up here for you guys. But before that, just a classic Tacoma skyline. So this one is also from over Tacoma. And the picture here on the bottom is from 1923. And what you really can anchor to is the Hotel Olympus. And the Hotel Olympus was designed by a Tacoma architect, August Darmer, but it was the passion project of Leopold Schmidt, which, if you're not familiar with Leopold Schmidt, he is the father, grand poobah of Olympia beer, a German immigrant who tried to make his money in mining, but then realized that the artesian wells in Olympia were just too good to pass up. So he started a beer empire and wanted to get in on that sweet, sweet Tacoma money back when Olympia wasn't doing so hot. So he had the Hotel Olympus built and named after his beer. And today it is an apartment building, but you can see it still is a major anchor down there. And you can see also the Washington building just to the right of the Tacoma Dome up there, as it is down here. And this is for one of our coming tours, talking about the controversy of that building and how it was unfinished for quite a long period of time. Well, you're in luck, Taylor, because we've got a Whiskey Row tour coming up here in the very near future, as well as a Tacoma Noir tour, and both really focus on this area. So ask and you shall receive. But yeah, here's just a great shot of the Hotel Olympus. I believe this was late 20s, early 1930s. And you can see the Hippodrome just to the right there, which unfortunately is no longer with us today. But this is the Hotel Olympus as it is. And you can see there is part of that section there that used to connect the Olympus to the Hippodrome, and still created in that same fashion. It is the Pacific Northwest Collections Incorporated building today. And then this is another of the Andrew Cox ones where he's overlaid that historic photo on there. Now, in the bottom level of the Olympus, it used to always be a restaurant, and you can still see the original mosaic tiles, the original hand-carved bar that was lost in a poker match is now in the back of the restaurant, the Forum, which is on the bottom level of this building today, as well as the original Hotel Olympus safe down there. So it's sort of like a micro museum. The basement of this building, though, had a very colorful history for a variety of reasons. It was, for a long period of time, though, the mirror room. There has always been a hot collection of jazz, late night activity, prohibition speakeasies, barbershops, and so on that have occupied the basement level of the Hotel Olympus. And they now have just a storage room down there. So I'm hoping that there is a new renaissance for Tacoma where we see a lot of these empty and echoed chambers find new life. A good example of that, actually, is directly across the street. So this is Whiskey Row across here. This is when on Pacific Avenue, there was the USO dance hall and bar for the African American division of the Army before desegregation. And today, that section is primarily occupied by Odd Otter Brewing. Looking today, what's so cool about looking at Whiskey Row here is that, particularly on the right there, all of these are original 1880s fronts to the building. So you really get a very detailed look at what those buildings used to look like. And so much of their preservation has actually been due in part to Johnson & Cox Printing Company, which owns the majority of them and has been there, I think, since the 1920s. And yes, for those of you who aren't already familiar, it was called Whiskey Row because this was the main area for sailing, gambling, and whatnot. And in fact, Tacoma's first crime boss, Harry Morgan, who established the first saloon in Tacoma proper, set up the Theater Comique, which was a place where you could get any sort of vice that your mind could possibly conjure, right down here on Whiskey Row. This is what it would have looked like at the time, though. So this would have been early. Oh, I'm sorry. This is from, early Whiskey Row. And then here as well. It gives you sort of a glimpse into the time there. And then this is farther down. So this is more where the University of Washington campus is today. You can see the Courtyard Marriott just behind this glaring yellow Jeep down there. But just up a ways is the Bostwick building. Now, I love this shot because it really shows you the heart of Tacoma's entertainment district in 1929. The Bostwick building was always designed to be a hotel with a retail space at the bottom down here. At the time, this would have been Siemens Flower Shop. And this building is just bananas. It's officially, thanks to the Daughters of the American Revolution, listed as the first place that in 1873, anyone ever officially recommended that during the national anthem, we should stand and take our hats off. What a bizarre bit of trivia, but it's on a bronze plaque, so you have to believe it has some validity. Russell G. O'Brien was the first person to formally put it forward that should be something that was nationally accepted. And it happened right here in Tacoma at the Bostwick building. Now, on the left of this photograph, you'll notice the Broadway Theater, which was unfortunately lost in a fire. But moving down the street there, you go more towards the Opera Alley section. And there's still Opera Alley today. It's where Devil's Reef Cocktail Bar and Over the Moon Cafe are. And it gets its name from essentially being the red light district of Tacoma. The understanding was that you could go in the front of one of the various theaters, like the Pantages, the Broadway, the Rialto, go out the back into the alley, find entertainment of a different variety, and then come back out through the front of the theater later and have yourself a nice little alibi going to the opera. And they were shorter shows back then because these were predominantly vaudeville theaters in the area, particularly the Pantages. So there you go. More fun CD trivia to take to your next Zoom meeting. This is the Bostwick today. I'm sorry to say that is unfortunately the actual color of it. And there's just nothing that I can do about that. But where we are right now, the angle of the camera is coming from the upper level of the Pantages Theater. And we'll actually look at that a little bit more. But this is the first photograph I've ever been able to find of the Hotel Bostwick, named after its benefactor, Dr. Bostwick, who paid for its construction. And you can see just the beauty of the facade there before they did that stucco on there. And it really breaks my heart literally every time I'm downtown, because this is what it looks like now. But I want you to carry that image in your heart and still love this building. We all have times in our life where we don't look our best, but it's important to keep loving what's underneath. You didn't realize it's going to get so deep tonight. Now, jumping way, way, way north, in fact, out of Tacoma for a moment, we are now on the line in between Point Defiance Park, which you see at the northern portion of this photograph, and the Asarco plant, which is technically in Ruston. And for I'm going to say 100 years, the Asarco plant was a copper smelting operation out in Ruston, named after Mr. William Rust, the guy who took over that entire operation and made it very wealthy and prominent. And today it looks like this. So it is the Point Ruston Fun Dream Complex, complete with restaurant, movie theater, condos, apartments. There's a Forelli's, which is really, really the benchmark of how you know that you've really made it. To give you guys that juxtaposition again, Asarco to Point Ruston, it is one of the, I think, boldest and most jarring transitions that we get to look at tonight, because a lot of places, for example, the William Rust Mansion, the first Rust Mansion in the area before their son unfortunately died and they moved into a different mansion. This one, built of Wilkinson sandstone, is on I Street today, and you can see, other than the trees, it looks relatively untouched. And to see buildings like this that have remained historically preserved is delightful. Juxtapose that to something like this is exactly this right now. So some things have stayed the same. Some things have dramatically changed. One of my favorite that has sort of strides that middle ground there is of the Henry Mill in Old Town. There's almost always, from the 1850s onward until it was eventually shut down, been one mill or another down in the Old Town area here. This particular photo is from 1925. And this is basically at the bottom of North Star Street. And you can still see remnants of the mill down there today. And what I wanted to point out here is this beehive burner here was where they would dispose of wood slag, wood remnants there. You could dump them in there, huge inferno would ensue, and you would catch the sparks and other things that could burn down your entire city with the top of the structure there, which was the inspiration for that building in the back there. That is the chimney for the hot shop for the Museum of Glass. And it is to remind us of our industrial roots here in Tacoma and the fact that there used to be quite a few of those beehive burners down there on the coast. And yes, oh man, thank you, Lauren, for bringing it up. The Point Ruston lobby has honestly one of my favorite, I'm going to call it a museum. Honestly, it's a museum down there, and it's got a lot of the casting trays for the copper ingots. It's got some of the original copper ingots down there as well. And my favorite part, and my kid's favorite part, is they've got one of the old like plunger detonators. And so you can go, and when you actually plunge it, it plays the video of them destroying the stack, which, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, here we go. So this is the Asarco smelter stack. You can see it was massive, over 570 feet high. And when this area became a huge ecological cleanup and the smelting plant went away forever, the determination for what to do with the stack came up. And so it was determined that they would implode it. And there's some cool footage that I wish I would have got for you guys, but I neglected to do that. So I'll put it on the Facebook page after, because it's good stuff. But when we're looking at the area, you know, Henry Mill or Dickman Mill is a good example, because the first real development in the area after the Puyallup started in Old Town, Tacoma. And so here is one of the first photographs we have of Old Town, Tacoma. This would have been of what is now 30th Street. It would have been the main street through Old Town there. And then it very quickly developed into a prominent area full of craftsman homes, a tremendous amount of maritime traffic, and in its peak, 13 saloons. It was a rough town. It got so bad, there were so many mariners coming in and out of the area that the police just had an understanding that as soon as the sun went down, you got out of Old Town. You did not police that area. But it has a lot of gems still in it, including this building here. This is Seaman's Rest, which was built as a safe haven and refuge for sailors in the area. With all those saloons and brothels, it was very easy to fall into a bad way. So the woman who created Seaman's Rest, Brigitte Funark, was an immigrant whose husband died at sea when he was a captain, so she wanted to have a safe place for sailors. And Seaman's Rest was it. And today it looks like this. So it's still down there. Actually, it doesn't look exactly like this. Even though it's on the historic register, it is a very vivid blue right now. But that is still right down there in Old Town today and looks very similar to this, just with a fresh coat of paint. Another building in Old Town that you want to juxtapose, and I don't have one of the originals of it, unfortunately, but Carr Hall. Job Carr, the first real prominent white settler to the Old Town area. His son built a massive complex for himself, and then over the years, it went through a variety of uses. It was a Pythian temple, it was a grocer, it was used as a meeting hall for a lot of stuff. But in the 1970s, Carr Hall was in a very bad way, and so it got completely rejuvenated and turned into the Connolly Law Offices today. But this is right down there on 30th in Old Town. And this building, while it has been very altered, is the building that you would have seen from 1880, more or less. Boom, boom, boom. Oh, yeah. So thank you, Mr. Wheeler, for getting our smokestack demolition in there. You guys can all take a look on that in a moment or two. But let's take you back to the Dickman Mill, because this would have been it in 1948. I think is when they took this particular photograph. And then you can see it now. I'm actually going to play a quick video for you guys. This is from one of the fantastic people. EP Video Creations did this amazing piece of it. And I want to play it for you guys because it looks at that area and it's really extraordinary here. So, yeah. Now, technical caveat, those underwater photos are from my home turf of Eastern Washington, but I'm always on board for good storytelling. And no, I don't have any top of the ocean photos that I'm going to be doing tonight. Someone asked about that. The top of the ocean is just in and of itself a phenomenal story. And so I'm going to save that and its mob connection for a whole separate tour. So it's on its way. Don't worry. But one of the greatest structures that we still have today, which is a cool back and forth, is of St. Peter's Church here in Old Town. And what's great about this is it is one of the oldest structures in Tacoma. Technically, there is an older one in the city right now, but it's a transplant. Of the buildings that were built here, this is the oldest. It's from 1873. And what I love about this is that I already told you Old Town was kind of a rough zone. And so people got together and they're like, man, we could use Jesus, don't you think? And a lot of other people are like, you're right. We really could. So in 7 days, they built this church back in 1873. And then they had a 975-pound bell that they wanted to put up there. And they're like, I don't know what we're going to do with this. So the decision was made to just top this tree right next door and then use ship rigging to hoisting it up there. When they did so, they counted, I believe, just shy or just over 500 rings. So it technically had the world record for being the oldest bell tower in America, until unfortunately it rotted away and it was replaced with a derrick for a period of time. And then that was destroyed by ivy and so on and so forth. But today they have a metal post where that bell, the original bell, still hangs aloft. This photo that I have is from, I think, 2018. So just before the new bell tower went up. But this is still what St. Peter's, or now Old St. Peter's, looks like today. And you can see it hasn't changed much at all. In fact, the secondhand organ that's inside the building is still the original one from the 1870s. Here's a shot from the 1950s when it fell into pretty severe disrepair. And they decided to refurbish it after that. So it's still the historic building, but they started taking better care of it after the 1950s. And yes, Job Car Cabin tours of Old Town. The Job Car Cabin Museum is located right in Old Town. It's in a 2000 replica of the original Job Car Cabin that was established down there in Old Town. They do phenomenal stuff down there. They'll take you past Slovenian Hall. This was built in 1901 for Croatian immigrants, and this is what it looks like today. There's also a fantastic bronze statue in front of it by Larry Anderson, who was a local artist who does the majority of bronze statues throughout the greater Tacoma area. Now, when we're looking at places that have dramatically changed, this is the Stadium District. And right there on the left of this photograph is the original Annie Wright school. And for those of you who are familiar with Annie Wright, you can probably already guess that this looks significantly different than the school does today. Here's it from the other side, looking south down at the Annie Wright School. That building was eventually deemed too small, and so they destroyed it. And the building that occupies that space today, like on the exact footprint, is Stadium Thriftway. So this is what it looks like right now. The old Chevy dealership that used to be on top on the right of that building, second floor there, is now the Rhinehouse Tacoma. So some things have changed. And here's another one of those Andrew Cox recaptured city photos showing the original Annie Wright overlaid on the modern Annie Wright. There's also, you'll probably notice following Facebook around town, that there's going to be, thanks to Tacoma Historic Society, a showing of Eyes of the Totem here in early December. And Eyes of the Totem actually features the Annie Wright School pretty heavily in it. Eyes of the Totem is a 1920s silent film that was shot, produced, and then sent out from Tacoma here during the great days of Tacoma's film industry. Like so many things Tacoma, there was a huge peak of success and then it vanished into the ether. And it is our job to make sure that people remember that story. So yeah, unfortunately, the film industry never took off for a long-lasting gig here in Tacoma. And I believe a lot of that hinged on the fact that the technology to put sound into film came out. And Tacoma didn't quite jump on to that streetcar fast enough to make it worth anyone's time. This is right downtown. This is the University Bookstore for the University of Washington in Tacoma. looking at it when it was on fire as a dry goods storage facility back in the 1920s. And then here's one of my favorite ones, because I think he blends 3 different timelines here. On the far left, you have the modern Foss Waterway. In the center, you have the sort of 1910, 1920s, and then a lot of those like rowboats, which would have been Foss rowboats down there on the bottom right, which I think is just an extraordinary one. So yeah, look into Andrew Cox Recaptured City. At Recaptured City on Facebook is the best place to look into that. I'll let you guys pour through those on your own because it's a lot. Back to another of the over Tacoma ones. So this is from the east, looking westward on the far side of Port of Tacoma. And you can see that long line there that was originally designed. So that would have eventually connected to the Murray Morgan or 11th Street Bridge and gave essentially a lifeblood to areas like unincorporated Pierce County over on the other side where Browns Point is today. And it's just stunning to me to see how much the port has really developed and changed over time. You can see another one here. So this is exactly where the Tacoma Hotel would have been. The Tacoma Hotel is that large one down there on the bottom portion of the photo, perched above. You can see the long grain warehouse on the right there. And so many of my tours recently have really focused on that grain house and the Foss Waterway Seaport. And so you can see it right down there on the edge of the Foss Waterway. When the Tacoma Hotel burned down, it left a vacancy not only in the hearts of the people, but also in the real estate and skyline of Tacoma. And they filled it with this building here eventually. Moving farther up the hill to where Hilltop is, this is Engine House number 5 from 1910, which was still operating with horses at the time. That was just next door to First Norwegian Lutheran Church, which was dedicated in 1891. This particular photograph is from 1931. But that building still exists today and has been renamed to the Ernest S. Brazil Multipurpose Building. And if you're not familiar with Ernest S. Brazil, he's going to be his own tour coming up here soon as well. He was a reverend pastor in the area who was a tremendous civil rights activist, humanitarian that really did incredible things for the city of Tacoma. And because of his heart and integrity, they actually not only named this building, but several other places for him. In fact, part of 12th Street momentarily becomes Ernest S. Brazil Street, which is a great testament to his job as a humanitarian in the area. Very difficult for the post people to find. Having once lived on Ernest S. Brazil Street, I can tell you it's a tricky place to find. But this is a 1927 hand-tinted photograph of the Tacoma Hotel. This was taken in 1927, even though the hotel was built in 1884. And you can see on the right there, the totem pole installed in 1903, which is going to feature very prominently in Eyes of the Totem coming up here soon. And there's just so many stories about the Tacoma Hotel that, because of the length of our tour tonight, I won't get into, but I'll save them for later. But one thing I thought was interesting, this picture's from 1936, and this is of the Tacoma Hotel Annex dining room. And the description lists it as having been designed as a duplicate of an English tavern. But I keep thinking to myself, that's incredibly posh for an English tavern. I don't know which English taverns they were modeling it after, but it looks very clean cut. This is the building that occupies the space where the Tacoma Hotel used to be. You can still see the last remaining section of that mile-long grain warehouse in the upper left-hand portion of the photo over there, and that is the Foss Waterway Seaport Museum today. Back way down the street on the other side of Tacoma is the Harmon Furniture Manufacturing Building. This particular picture is the early days of it, and then this is a more modern photo of the Harmon building today, which was a brewery, restaurant, and lofts. And I believe the lofts are still operational. And even though there has been some change up in ownership of the Harmon The brewery and restaurant are still in the bottom of the building today. Now, it just wouldn't be a Tacoma Then and Now tour without at least talking about the great Northern Pacific Hotel that was built in the late 1800s. While it was never opened as a hotel, they did their best to complete the building before the great financial panic in the late 1800s. And so the shell of this building was left like this for a period of time. You can see also the trestle bridge that goes over what was once called Old Woman's Gulch, right here on the bottom right of the photograph here. And through generous financial sponsorship from my personal hero, Alan C. Mason, this area was finally connected. So you could actually drive and take a streetcar across the trestle bridge and get connected to the area, because the gulch was fierce for a long period of time. As anyone who's ever Googled flooding in Stadium Bowl knows, it's a serious endeavor. As this building was completed, it was, of course, purchased by the Tacoma Public Schools District, turned into a high school, which it has operated as a high school ever since. And then when Frederick Heath, the architect who finished this construction, created the stadium in Old Woman's Gulch down there by sluicing the sides and using the sediment to create a flat playing field, it was renamed Stadium High School in, I believe, 1911. And so this is the building today. Traveling back in time really quick, you can see the West Coast's greatest amphitheater in full glory. This would have been early 1900s. And today it is the Stadium Bowl used for all of the high school games down there. What's pretty extraordinary about this building too, other than the fact that in the basement of it, there is a dog kennel, wine cellar, hundreds of yards of steam tunnels. There was also 2 subterranean swimming pools very early on. I've never found a picture of the girls' pool, which was smaller than the boys' pool, but this is what the subterranean boys' pool looked like in the early 1900s. That was eventually deemed to just be unsavory for too many reasons to even justify keeping it around, so it was filled in. And in the 1980s, they created this beauty right here, which is the current pool underneath Stadium High School. The more you know. When you're walking around downtown, you can still see quite a few remnants of early Tacoma, particularly in the ghost art that remains on the brick buildings in the main downtown corridor down there. And one of my favorite buildings that I think gets overlooked all the time is that when the Northern Pacific Railroad came to the area, they had a tremendous amount of interest in protecting their business and their payroll in the area. So they hired the Pinkerton Detective Agency as sort of like their muscle and investigative power in the area. And this building here is the Pinkerton building. It was their main headquarters in the area. And it's still right on the fringe of the University of Washington Tacoma campus today. This is what it looks like currently. And I just love that it's still down there. You can still see the crown of it right there. And that way, like late 1800s that was established down there. Jumping back to the Stadium District really quick, I've got this cool lineup of what used to be the, I think, Grey Goose Confectionery. It was a variety of things, but for the longest run of its life, it has been the Ranko's Rexall drugstore. It's a pharmacy, post office, and above all else, candy store that made its most money, not as a pharmacy, but as selling candy to the students of Stadium High School. And in both the historic 1920 photo at the top there and the modern photo down here at the bottom, you can see the towers of Stadium High School peeking out on the right-hand side of that photo over there. Looking at the Pantages downtown, you can still see the giant building that occupies the space where the Great Tacoma Hotel used to be. This is not vintage Pantages, unless you want to consider the Roxy Theater in the 1980s vintage Pantages. But it gives a good example of how the Pantages has remained a prominent theater in the area throughout the history of this area. It was completed in the early 1900s as a vaudeville theater for the circuit of Pantages theaters throughout the country. But due to a tremendous amount of upheaval in Alexander Pantages' personal life, it changed into a different vaudeville theater and then eventually into a motion picture theater And I think most people that attend our tours recognize it most as the Roxy before it became the Pantages again. But here is early vaudeville days here. So this is when it would have been called the Orpheum instead of the Pantages. Taking you briefly back downtown, this is the North Pacific building again. Here's another Andrew Cox one, which I just love the overlays down there as well. And then one of the buildings that really just blows my mind. So this is the Waddell building. This was 1889 that this was constructed. And what's amazing is that if you've been in the Tacoma area, you've most likely seen this building and not even known it. Because while it looked like this in the 1880s and beyond, it quickly got chopped up and pared down into a variety of things and has been so reduced in size and grandeur that you might not recognize it. So this next photo I'm going to show you is of the Waddell building in 1889, 1979, and 2019. Most people would have known it as the Pacific Grill before, unfortunately, they closed forever this year, as well as the Union Bank building. And you can see on the corner here that it has remained in some ways untouched, but it's only that one corner. That massive building has gone the way of the dodo, unfortunately. This particular photo is from the 1920s when the USS Lexington, that aircraft carrier here, arrived in December to power the city of Tacoma. Again, this will be its own tour sometime, but essentially due to a drought, there wasn't enough hydroelectricity to power the city of Tacoma. So they appealed to the US Navy, who sent this aircraft carrier, who along with two massive generators provided a great deal of power and good looking young sailors to inject a lot of life into the city of Tacoma. And the celebration was, from what I've heard, fantastic. They, for a period of time here, powered the entire city with this aircraft carrier, and the parties and the dances that ensued were legendary to hear it told. This is that area today. So just beyond the Temco grain silos there, you can see the Foss Waterway Seaport building where the Lexington would have been docked as it was providing power to the area. Jumping to a similar time period, you can see from the early 1920s, the drill floor of the U.S. Armory building, which today looks like this. And you'll notice the drill floor itself is exactly the same, but one of the major differences is they don't have the false ceiling with the skylights there anymore. This building has gone through so many renovations, but the exterior of it is more or less untouched. One thing missing from the skyline, though, is the old courthouse building, which is pictured on the right-hand side of the photo here, which is now this parking lot after it was deemed unsafe and demolished. So looking back at the original dreams of Tacoma, with that vacant tide flat there and the grand English-style structures there, to the reality of Tacoma today, you can see that while not everything has gone as we've planned as a city, that there is a tremendous amount of beauty still left here today. And in fact, each of these historic gems has found a level of preservation here today. And we're very, very lucky to have the historic structures that we have today still preserved in Tacoma. And something about their anonymity, I think, has really contributed to their long-standing success. So, with that said, couple things. If you've enjoyed your tour tonight and you feel like showing that appreciation, you can always tip your guide on the homepage of prettygrittytours.com. We have a PayPal button there. Absolutely no need, though, because this entire presentation has been brought to you by the generous altruism of the City of Tacoma's Historic Preservation Office. And I know that they would be delighted to answer any of the major questions you have, as would I myself. So if you want, put them in the comments. We always screen them after and make sure that we do our best to provide historic information. And a lot of these photos we're going to continue to put up on our Facebook page moving forward through December, really. But again, check out the City of Tacoma's Historic Preservation Office. Check out Over Tacoma for their incredible aerial photography. And if you find something that you want to put on your wall, don't hesitate, because they're local, they're talented, and they're making this whole thing brighter for all of us. And with that, I'm going to bid you guys good evening. My name is Chris with Pretty Gritty Tours, working today for the City of Tacoma, and I really appreciate you guys coming out on this travel through time. All that's left is to encourage you to keep on exploring. You guys have a great night.